You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and a case from 2014 re-emerged in the headlines this week when a judge granted the release of Morgan Geyser. Okay, that name might not be familiar to you, but I bet when I tell you she was the mastermind behind the Slender Man stabbings, you will nod your head yes, remembering the terrifying story of two 12-year-old girls, Morgan and Anissa Wire, who lured their friend Peyton Leutner into the wooded area of a local park and stabbed her 19 times, all in the apparent need to satisfy the fictional character Slender Man. Now, we have to go back to 2009, when an online forum called Something Awful, and yeah, that's the name. It makes it sound like I'm saying that it was an awful name. No, the actual formal name is Something Awful. Well, that forum, they held a paranormal Photoshop contest, and the image of Slender Man was born. And it's a super tall, thin character with an all-white head, but there is no individual features on that head. He was created wearing a black suit, a black tie, black shoes, and a white-collared shirt. The stories about Slender Man expanded over a couple of years, and the fear was this fictional character could cause you to, actually experience real-life things, like maybe a coughing fit, or Slender Man might cause you to forget everything, like amnesia. Well, in the Slender Man fiction, he's often shown hiding in forests. So Slender Man was created, then it really went viral on the creepypasta websites, which are places where people share their horror stories. All right, there's your background. And we have three humans, Morgan, Anissa, and Peyton, and then the fictional character, Slender Man. And that fictional character becomes the ruler, like the king, the dominating force in the relationship with these three girls. All three girls were students back in 2014 at Horning Middle School in the Milwaukee suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin. Peyton and Morgan were actually friends first, this in the years leading up to 2014. They became friends when Peyton asked Morgan if they could eat together because Peyton had noticed Morgan was eating alone. When Peyton was asked about Morgan, she described her as funny, but always just a little lonely. Now, those first years of the friendship were good, but in 6th grade, Morgan reached out to Anissa, and the duo became a trio for a short time. And Morgan and Anissa bonded over the concept of Slender Man. The two became obsessed with the horror story character, and all of that made Peyton really uneasy. She told ABC News in later years that when they would talk about Slender Man, she just kind of felt frightened, and she didn't like that feeling. So then the trio became a duo again, with Peyton distancing herself, but she was still peripherally involved. With the new friendship dynamics, Anissa and Morgan began developing a plot line, if you will, essentially putting together a plan to murder Peyton. But in their minds, they were acting as proxies to Slender Man. They even used code words like cracker to explain a knife and camping trip to describe the wooded area where they thought Slender Man lived. And this plan took months. The ideas were formulated in February of 2014, and the plan identified that May 31st would be the day of the murder. As the murder day approached, Anissa and Morgan invited Peyton to hang out with them. And then they eventually clarified that the three 12-year-olds would play hide-and-seek in the wooded area of David's Park. Once they entered the trees, Morgan and Anissa knocked Peyton to the ground, pinning her down and taking turns stabbing her with a 5-inch knife, a total of 19 times. In the attack, 2 of Peyton's major organs were damaged, and one of the stab wounds missed Peyton's major artery by less than a millimeter. Her diaphragm was ruptured and her liver was wounded. After the 19 wounds were delivered, Morgan and Anissa told Peyton that they were leaving to go get help. It was a lie, and Peyton knew it. After the girls left her there, Peyton drug herself to a nearby road where a cyclist came upon the bloodied and wounded preteen. EMS was called and Peyton was rushed to the hospital, where surgeons operated for 6 hours to repair the critical trauma inflicted by Morgan and Anissa. Well, 5 hours after the stabbing, police found Morgan and Anissa walking on Interstate 94. They were reportedly calm, and they had an explanation for the trauma they had inflicted. They said they were walking to meet Slender Man at his home, the Slender Mansion, and they said this was located in the Nicollet National Forest. So side note here, the Nicollet National Forest, well, it's 200 miles from where they are. So they thought, as two 12-year-olds, that they were going to walk 200 miles to the Slender Man mansion. They readily admitted to investigators that they had stabbed Peyton, but that they were appeasing Slender Man. Investigators noted that Morgan, in particular, held zero empathy or guilt. The two girls were arrested and charged with the attempted murder of their friend. However, Anissa's charge was for second-degree attempted murder, since investigators felt she was, quote, going along with the plan, while Morgan was the mastermind of the attempted murder. During the initial investigation, and then also the eventual pre-trial psych evaluations, Morgan explained that she had visual and auditory hallucinations since she could basically remember. She said she could see what she called ghosts. She also talked about how she would often see colors melting down the walls. She talked about her two imaginary friends, Maggie and Sev. She explained to psychologists that she had one dominant hallucination that included a man that she had named It. She said he was the color of smoke and dark ink. She said he would appear in mirrors, or she would see him, like apparating just around the corners of the room. As she was housed in an adult facility, correctional officers would tell investigators that she would often just talk to herself. On certain occasions, she would pretend to be a cat instead of a young girl. She also said Slender Man would visit her in her cell. She even said she was visited by characters from the Harry Potter series. Well, after much kind of hit and miss psychiatric care, Morgan was diagnosed with early onset childhood schizophrenia. 3 years after the attempted murder, Anissa went ahead and pled guilty, and she accepted a plea offer that stipulated that she would not go to trial if she agreed to be admitted to a forensic psychiatric hospital. But this was kind of weird. You've got Anissa, who's not nearly as mentally, bad off. Like, she's just not at the level that Morgan's at. And she went ahead and pled guilty, and she accepted the plea offer, but her official record says not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. All of this was because her final diagnosis of schizophrenia was determined by court-appointed psychiatrists. They just didn't feel like it was as bad as Morgan's. Now, her plea offer had her sentenced to 25 years to life, but she was only required to spend 3 years of that in a state psychiatric unit. The duration of her total time served would be determined by her resolution of her psychiatric symptoms. So, if her symptoms resolved, she could be out after 3 years of care. If not, she would stay incarcerated even if it was in a psychiatric facility. Well, in the summer of 2021, Anissa was released from the Winnebago Health Institute at the age of 19. She will be supervised until she is 37 years old. So that leaves us with the update about Morgan, the quote mastermind of this stabbing. It seems Morgan has become somewhat of a study case for mental evaluations. Like I said, she was initially determined to be early onset schizophrenia, but that diagnosis shifted just slightly as she continued her care in the Winnebago Health Institute after also pleading guilty and being found criminally insane. It had been determined she should spend up to 40 years in the facility. Well, during the last few years, doctors began to believe that Morgan suffered from psychotic spectrum disorder, and that would be genetically linked versus Morgan introducing her disorder to her life. Doctors also began to consider that trauma heightened those factors. Like, they believe there was familial sexual abuse allegedly by Morgan's father, and they think that altered her mental state. I think that's kind of obvious, but okay, at least they're deepening what they think is going on with Morgan. Now, Morgan was also determined to have some form of autism. And all of these things I've explained were determined to be kind of like a cataclysmic storm that resulted in Morgan's hallucinations and violent actions. Well, last year, in April of 2024, two of Morgan's doctors had recommended that Morgan not be released from the psychiatric facility. They didn't feel like her symptoms had completely regulated. But then last week, that recommendation changed. Both those doctors now feel that the facility will no longer aid Morgan. In fact, they said the facility and the patients housed there will begin to harm her growth if she stays. And the judge agreed. So now, Morgan, along with her doctors, are developing a conditional release plan that will involve goals for Morgan along with continued health care expectations. That plan must be approved by the courts before Morgan is released. She is expected to live in a group home when she is released, so it's not like she's going to immediately go out and find an apartment and just mainstream back into life, but also that group home is only going to last for maybe 2-ish months. She will most likely wear a GPS monitoring device as part of the plan. And that plan is expected to be reviewed on March 3rd in a scheduled hearing. Of course, the next question is, how does this affect Peyton, the survivor of this attack? Well, following the attack back in 2014, Peyton went back to school the next year, and she did well. She excelled in music programs, and she even continued volunteering at the local animal shelter. She received extensive counseling to cope with the vicious attack and the mental aftermath. And in 2019, ABC News conducted an exclusive interview with Peyton, who was nearing adulthood at that time. She revealed that she had slept with scissors under her pillow for years following the attack. This is kind of a form of protection for her. She acknowledged that she learned from the attack and that, in a way, it had framed her life for her to be more focused and driven to become who she is now. We also know that Peyton has gone on and attended Marquette University in Milwaukee. The Associated Press said in 2021 that she owned 2 cats named Salem and Lilith, which is just kind of sweet. I couldn't find that Peyton had responded to the conditional release, and maybe she will as the date comes closer in March for Morgan to be released, but her mother did comment prior to Thursday's meeting, and the mother said she was confident that the courts would rule to keep her daughter safe. Okay, that's pretty vague. I hope the mother feels the release plan will do just that, but her comments did come before it was determined that she would be released, so we're kind of left in the dark. I remember a little bit about the scare with Slender Man. I asked, while I was researching this episode, I asked Peyton and Marley if they remembered being scared by the fictional character, and they would have been in their preteen and early teen years as all of this was going down. They said not really. They just knew about the lore. But once the stabbing occurred, it definitely became part of the culture. And that's obvious because there's a documentary from HBO Films. Criminal Minds and Law and Order both did episodes loosely based on the concept. A movie called Terror in the Woods was aired on Lifetime. And then Netflix made a movie called Mercy Black. It was released back in 2019. Let me know if Slender Man was part of your nightmares and also how you feel about Peyton, our victim in this crime story conclusion. All right, before I tell you this next story, I want to kind of explain that people talk to me about rise in crime. They ask me questions. And when we talk about abuse of kids or the education system, I frequently say, if you don't like kids, why do you work in the education system? But then that leaves me asking myself, maybe it's not that these people don't like kids. Maybe it's that no matter where they work, they will cause disruption. And maybe it's actually both. You can tell me after we look at this case out of Kentucky, where a mother has filed a lawsuit against a school district and her son's principal for threatening her son and his friend with a toy gun. Now, the lawsuit filed in court last week alleges that Dwayne Wright, he's the principal at Harston Elementary School, and this all happened back in 2019. Well, it alleges he pulled Kamei Dixon's 7-year-old son and his friend, another 7-year-old, into the principal's office. As the two boys sat across the desk from Principal Wright, Kamei alleges that he lectured them about being kicked out of class for misbehavior, and then he slammed a plastic toy gun onto the desk and told the boys to, quote, "get it together or I'm going to feed you to the wolves." Now, the lawsuit also alleges the boys were forced to stay in the principal's office all day. This is a form of punishment for disrupting their classes. Kamei states in the lawsuit that the boys believed their lives were being threatened and that once released from the principal's office, each boy told separate teachers about the threats and the toy gun that they clearly thought at the time was real. Those teachers then communicated the interactions with the boys to the appropriate authorities, and the boys were then interviewed by Child Protective Services. During those interviews, one of the boys claimed that Principal Wright had spanked him on another occasion. The lawsuit describes the boys' accounts that were reported separately, remember, as consistent and detailed. Now, the lawsuit also claims that following those CPS interviews, Principal Wright pulled each boy out of class again to discuss what was said in the individual interviews. When Wright was contacted by CPS about communicating with the boys about the interviews, he denied that he had talked with them. So remember, this all happened back in 2019, and the Jefferson County School District examined the incident, and they came to the conclusion that the boys' recounting of the incident was unsubstantiated and inconclusive. So no disciplinary action was taken against Principal Wright. However, the lawsuit states that later in that school year, Principal Wright allegedly contacted the mother, and he admitted to showing the boys a toy gun that he had confiscated from another student. The mother also says her son was confronted by the principal multiple times over the next few months. She says her son's behavior at home changed drastically, in her words, following the alleged toy gun incident. And she said he began to experience bedwetting episodes. He would also complain of stomach aches, and then he started to have some uncharacteristic outbursts. Well, once the school district decided that there was not enough evidence to warrant discipline of that principal, the Kentucky Education Professional Standards Board said, hey, we're going to look at this. And as they were gathering evidence as part of their review, Principal Wright basically cut a deal with the state board. And with that deal, he served a 2-month suspension from his position. He also agreed to participate in ethics training and complete a probationary period. Now, this just left me asking a question that I did not find answered in any of the resource materials. If you cut a deal, aren't you sort of kind of admitting guilt? I mean, if you're saying you need ethics training, what do you need ethics training for? Just asking. Now, indications are that the ethics training may not have worked because in 2022, a different parent of the Harston Elementary School student filed a lawsuit against Principal Wright, claiming he was physically abusive with her child. Now, according to that lawsuit, Principal Wright became frustrated that that young child was crying during library class. So he grabbed the child by the bicep and drug him from the library to the office area. When the mother was contacted and told about the incident, she drove to the school to remove him from attending. But the lawsuit alleges that the principal told her no, he would not be leaving. And then she says Principal Wright jabbed his forefinger into her forehead. All right, following that 2022 lawsuit, Principal Wright was removed from his position as principal at the elementary school, but he wasn't fired. He was instead transferred to a different part of the school system. He was still in a leadership position, though. Then in March of 2024, Principal Wright was terminated from the Jefferson County School District. Now, a local journalist with WDRB did a deep dive into Principal Wright, this all following that 2022 accusation. And that journalist found that Principal Wright had 6 alleged abuse complaints filed against him in a 10-year span of employment. It seems the district marked all 6 of those complaints as unsubstantiated. And a performance evaluation that was uncovered in that investigative work by WDRB revealed that Principal Wright had been advised to always have another adult present when he disciplined a child. All right, that left me saying, isn't that just sound advice across the board? Why did he need to be told that? And then there's one more layer here. Kamei Dixon, well, she worked in the same building as Dwayne Wright after he was removed from being a principal, but before he was terminated. Okay, make sure you get that right here. Kamei is the mother who has just filed the lawsuit, and she's employed by the district, presumably, and she worked in the same building that Principal Wright was moved to when he was told, hey, you can't be a principal anymore. All right, in the lawsuit filed last week, Kamei says she felt physically ill in his presence. She also said that he repeatedly asked her to just let go of the investigation, just let go of the issues with him. She says she eventually quit her job due to having to interact with Wright. Now, the lawsuit does also name district leadership as defendants, and the suit seeks punitive and compensatory damages. Let me know what you think of this one. I grew up with an elementary school principal that had a paddle hanging on his wall, which wasn't okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue. Now let's finish with the gory details that have been released by authorities in a 30-year-old woman's death out of Harriman, Utah. A graphic 8-page probable cause statement has been released through Salt Lake City's 3rd District Court that states 40-year-old convicted felon Jacob Holt Johnson murdered Summer Tatiana Roney in an especially heinous and cruel way. Okay, we've got to go back to December. This is when officers approached a Jeep Compass that was parked diagonally across several parking spaces at a 7-Eleven convenience store that was located in Bluffdale, Utah. Officers found Jacob passed out behind the wheel. All right, you guys, that's nothing unusual. It's New Year's Eve. This guy, he gets blitzed. He drunk parks his car at a convenience store and officers find him. That's not weird, except it's what officers found in the back of the Jeep that took this ordinary situation to the heinous and cruel place that was stated in the probable cause. Okay, here's what they found. They looked through the window of the rear of the Jeep, and officers could see a woman stuffed and partially hanging out of a cardboard box. As officers opened the rear hatch, they found Summer with an extension cord wrapped around her neck. She was covered in bruises, and she had lacerations to her head, her arms, and legs. Summer was cold to the touch. According to the court documents, next to the box in the Jeep was a bloody hammer. As this scene unfolded, with officers arresting Jacob and Summer's body being collected and taken to the morgue, other investigators descended on Jacob's residence after they obtained an emergency search warrant. There they allegedly found blood pretty much everywhere. In the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the hallway, in the garage. Documents say bloody smudge marks were smeared across the kitchen floor, presumably indicating that Summer's body had been dragged from the entrance to the basement across the kitchen and out the garage house door. The stairs to the basement were covered in blood as well. Detectives say they located a mattress in the garage wrapped in plastic with bloodstains on it, as well as a paper towel with hair and smallish pieces of skin. Now, the charges also say that they found 2 large black trash bags with various items inside that were smeared with blood. Things like a karaoke machine and a lampshade. Also in the bags were lots of towels soaked in bleach and blood. Detectives noted that they could smell bleach throughout the home. Once they found what they considered to be the crime scene, Investigators contacted neighbors, and they say they secured video footage from December 30th that shows Jacob in the driveway with his Jeep backed up to the open garage door. The liftgate of his Jeep is open, and Jacob can be seen maybe potentially rearranging items or moving items in and out of the Jeep. Friends of Summers say the last time they spoke with her was 2 days prior, on December 28th. And remember, it was New Year's Eve when Jacob was discovered drunk and passed out in the 7-Eleven parking lot. When interviewed by police, friends of Summer said that the relationship between Jacob and Summer was tumultuous, on again and off again for the past 4 years, with those off again points being triggered by Jacob's temper. Her friends told investigators that Summer had mental deficiencies that left her at about the level of like a 16-year-old instead of what you would expect from a 30-year-old woman. They also mentioned she was very kind and forgiving, hence the on-again portions of the relationship. Now, one of Summer's friends told investigators that she had confided in her about physical assault, one particular incident that happened in November. She said that Summer said Jacob had choked her nearly to death before finally letting go. Multiple friends said Summer was experiencing frequent physical abuse. Her autopsy indicated prolonged physical harm, and the state medical's office wrote that Summer's abuse was, quote, extreme, and was likely the cause of death due to the totality of her injuries that included blunt force trauma. Okay, let's just unpack that one for a minute. I think that means she was being abused nearly every day, and eventually her poor little body gave up on one of the final abuse incidences. Now, investigators believe the lacerations on her head and her arms and her legs, well, they think those were caused by the claw end of the hammer. Jacob has been charged with aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, and abuse and desecration of a dead body. He was also charged with possession of a weapon by a restricted person. The Salt Lake County District Attorney, Sim Gill, said the following: if you are experiencing domestic violence or are aware of someone who may be experiencing it, please report it so it can be investigated. If it's not reported, it cannot be investigated. And if it is not investigated, it cannot be prosecuted. Early intervention can help prevent an escalation of vice. Let me second that. If you or someone you love is experiencing violence, you can contact help at thehotline.org. Again, that's thehotline.org. Now to the comments from Thursday's episode. Many of you referenced Omar. Okay, remember, he's the guy who shot his dispatcher wife at their shared workplace. Tatiana on YouTube made a great clarification, though. She said his jealousy blinded him and that, unfortunately, it's just too late when he finally regretted his actions. And Serena mentioned that she disliked that Omar could be convicted of domestic violence and still legally obtain a gun. All right. Arkansas gun laws do appear to make it illegal to own a firearm if you are convicted of domestic violence. But in Omar's case, he was only charged, not convicted. Because remember, whomever was saying they were abused by Omar, well, they decided they would no longer cooperate with authorities. So those charges were dropped. But let's get some clarification here. In federal law that is based on a Lautenberg Amendment from 1968, well, that federal law says that no one with a domestic violence conviction should legally own a firearm. However, only 28 states mirror this federal law. The other states have kind of crafted their own regulations, so we kind of have this tug of war between state law and federal law. And then also keep in mind, some states have passed what are called red flag laws. What those mean is if somebody like Omar is, accused or showing signs of being involved in assault, the red flag law will take effect and you can actually remove firearms from him. And if he's flagged, he wouldn't have been able to purchase one. So the long and short of this, the answer for you is that it really varies from state to state. And then in the case of the Florida doctor who allegedly abused young teens online and then one teen eventually took her life, well, some of you felt bad for his wife. Natalie recognized that women sometimes they take the brunt of their husband's actions. And then Amber said she just thinks the doctor is a complete sicko. And finally, many of you loved hearing about Q. I'll share more pictures of her as we go along. She's truly my little sidekick who waits patiently by the big windows on my staircase for me to return home each day. And in today's episode, she has slept the whole entire time, which is what she does most days now that she's 15 years old. All right, that's your Monday episode of Rise and Crime. Thanks for joining me here. I'm really grateful for everything that this, I guess I would call it a journey since May of 2023 has brought us. I'm excited to be coming up on 2 years with you guys. Please let me know any case suggestions and anything you'd like me to cover. Also, if you haven't left a 5-star review or a positive comment, I would love for you to do so. You could also like and follow us on all of our social media and YouTube accounts at Oh No Media. That's Rise and Crime, Murder with My Husband, and Into the Dark. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.